This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Mimi Goodman. We end this special with Josh Paul. In October, he resigned from the State Department to protest the Biden administration's push to increase arms sales to Israel amidst its siege on Gaza, calling it short-sighted, destructive, and contradictory. Paul had served as Director of Congressional and Public Affairs for the Bureau of Political Military Affairs in the State Department, which oversees arms transfers to Israel and other nations. In his resignation letter, he wrote, quote, "We cannot be both against occupation and for it. We cannot be both for freedom and against it. And we cannot be for a better world while contributing to one that is materially worse. I believe to the core of my soul that the response Israel is taking, and with it the American support both for that response and for the status quo of the occupation, will only lead to more and deeper suffering for both the Israeli and the Palestinian people, and is not in the long-term American interest," he wrote. I asked Josh Paul to talk about why he resigned from the State Department.
Yes, thank you. I decided to resign for three reasons. The first and most pressing of which is the very, I believe, uncontroversial fact that US-provided arms should not be used to massacre civilians, should not be used to result in massive civilian casualties. And that is what we are seeing in Gaza, and what we were seeing, very soon after the October 7th horrific attack by Hamas. I do not believe US-provided arms should be used to kill civilians. It is that simple. Secondly, I also believe that, as your previous guest identified, there is no military solution here, and we are providing arms to Israel on a path that has not led to peace, has not led to security, neither for Palestinians nor for Israelis. It is a moribund process and a dead-end policy. And yet, when I tried to raise both of these concerns with State Department leadership, there was no appetite for discussion, no opportunity to, look at any of the potential arms sales and raise concerns about them, simply a directive to move forward as quickly as possible. And so I felt I had to resign.
So talk more about that. Talk more about what kind of dialogue goes on at the State Department. And if you, for example, have met with Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, not to mention President Biden, to voice your concerns. And what about other veteran State Department officials?
So typically there is a very robust policy process in the State Department for arms transfers. And there are a lot of those, right? So we're talking about 20,000 arms sale cases a year that the State Department processes, which could be anything from bullets to radios to fighter jets. And for each of those, there is a lengthy process sometimes that looks at, what are the pros and cons of the sale, what are its human rights implications. That has not happened in this context for Israel. And as I say, when I raised those concerns against the existing laws, against the existing policies, there was no appetite for that discussion. I have not personally spoken to Secretary Blinken about this, nor certainly to President Biden. But I know that in the time since I left, there has been increasing discussion within the State Department, but has not led to any change of policies. In fact, as you heard earlier on your show, Vice President Harris was just saying yesterday that we will not place any conditions whatsoever on our arms to Israel. And that is unlike any arms transfer decision I've ever been a part of. There's always discussion about should we condition this to address human rights issues.
So who's leading this, Josh Paul? Who is preventing this? Who is suppressing all of this discussion within the State Department?
I honestly think in some ways it is coming from the very top of the US government and from the Biden White House. There are many in the State Department and across government who have reached out to me in recent weeks since I left to express their support, but also to say how difficult and how horrific they are finding US policy, and yet are being told when they try to raise these concerns, look, you can get emotional support. If you're finding this difficult, we'll find you something else to work on, but don't question the policy because it's coming from the top.
The HuffPost has this new piece that reports a task force on preventing atrocities did not meet until 2 weeks into the war, and officials say department leaders are telling them their expertise won't affect policy. Explain what goes on.
So whenever there is a crisis, as there is right now in Israel and Gaza, the department sets up a task force or multiple task forces that are uniquely shaped to address that crisis. So, for example, in the context of an earthquake, they might bring in experts on, refugee issues, on weather issues, on disease issues, that sort of, broad swath of people. In the context of Gaza, they have set up a task force to look at this problem, but according to the report you cite, it does not include the Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration, who are responsible for, U.S. support to refugee issues. So it is either a stunning oversight or it is an intentional disregard for the humanity of Palestinian civilians in Gaza.
At a meeting on October 26, a State Department source told you they recalled a top official advising staff to shift their focus away from Israel-Palestine and seek to make a difference in other parts of the world?
So I don't believe that was a conversation that I had with someone, but that is in the same report in the Huffington Post that you cite, yes.
So they're directing them not even to make comments on this, just stop talking about Israel-Palestine.
Yes, that's right. And I think, that reflects a tension or a censorship, right, that we are seeing not only in the US government. I think what's interesting here is that there is this censorship that has existed and expanded, to colleges and universities, where you talked about the doxing. I've also heard from many people across the American private sector, both from the Arab American community, but also more broadly from all sorts of diverse communities, who've said, we are afraid to speak up on this because we are in fear of our jobs. It's the same climate in government, and that is just not American.
So I wanted to ask you about this in these Times report that the White House has requested an unprecedented loophole in arms spending to allow it to be able to conduct arms deals with Israel in complete secrecy without oversight from Congress or the public.
Yes, so we provide Israel with $3.3 billion a year in foreign military financing, which is the State Department and US government's primary function or primary mechanism for funding the sale of arms to other countries. Of note, we typically provide, setting aside Ukraine, about $6 billion a year in foreign military financing around the world. So Israel already gets more than half of that. The language in the supplemental request that the Biden administration sent up would remove the requirement to notify Congress of any arms sales conducted under that funding. Typically, there is a process where for any major defense sale, Congress is notified of it. And there's actually a process prior to the formal notification where Congress gets to ask questions, poke, prod, delay, and then if it wishes to oppose a sale, can raise a joint resolution of disapproval on the floor. What this proposal would do is essentially destroy all of that, remove that congressional oversight, remove that congressional ability to object. It is unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it, and I cannot imagine that the committees of jurisdiction are viewing it very favorably, because it is just, such a damaging approach that also sets horrible precedent for other countries with whom, future administrations may decide they don't want Congress to be involved.
Since you are in charge of arms sales, what does this $14 billion that, it looks like both houses want to send it to Israel. It's just that the House one is controversial because they want to take that $14 billion from the IRS. And also they want to sever the funding for Israel from the funding for Ukraine. And Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, says he won't consider this bill. But it sounds like there is enough support in both houses for that extra, not the 3.8 or 3.3 billion yearly aid to Israel, but an extra $14 billion. You're the expert on arms sales. What would it be used for?
Yeah, and let me just say, I think there is, almost or near unanimous congressional support for this further military assistance to Israel. And I think what's fascinating about that is also there's a massive disconnect between where Congress is on these issues and where I think if you look at the polling, the American public are. And I think the current crisis is really crystallizing that difference. I don't think it will make any difference in terms of the passage of this package, but it may do down the line. With regards to this package specifically, it includes $3.5 billion in foreign military financing. Israel can draw on that to purchase essentially what it wants. And what's unusual about this as well, in addition to the removal of the notification, is that Israel would be entitled, under the proposal sent to Congress, to spend all of this money within its own defense industry. Israel is, of course, a top 10 exporter of arms around the world, often competing with the United States. And the idea that we will be providing funding to subsidize that competition is really unimaginable. But on top of that, the package also provides further funding from the Defense Department side for air and missile defense for Israel, for Iron Dome. And let me be clear, my concern here is on lethal assistance to Israel. When it comes to protecting civilians from rocket attacks, I believe that they should be. I don't believe anyone should have to live in fear of their homes, from rockets raining down on them. Although I believe that's the case whether they are in Israel under Iron Dome or whether they are in Gaza, for example. And of course, we never asked that question. The funding finally would also include research and development funding for equipment such as there is a experimental laser project called Iron Beam, which the US and Israel are working together on, air and missile defense system. If this is an emergency request, why are we looking at research and development for projects that have not even materialized yet? That doesn't sound like an emergency to me. So as with the arms transfers I saw when I was departing from the department, I think there is just a rush to push everything they can while they feel there is a window of political opportunity here where there will be no significant opposition.
What kind of response was there to your resignation?
To my resignation, I would say there has been an overwhelming response that I've heard from folks, from colleagues inside not only the State Department, but across the US government, actually, on the Hill, in the Defense Department, in the uniformed military services, including in combatant commands around the world. People have reached out to me to say, we fully agree with you. Obviously everyone has their own personal circumstances. I think if we had universal healthcare, it would make it a bit easier for people to stand up on principle. I myself am, trying to figure out what I do next on healthcare. But the point is that so many people have reached out to say, we hear you, we agree with you. And I think, one of the things I found is that a lot of people can be in individual offices and say, I can't speak up because I will lose my job, I will put my career in jeopardy. And there's no one else here I can talk to. And yet I'm hearing from someone else just a few desks over who's saying the same thing. So I think there really is a communications crisis, a transparency crisis within the US government, and a policy crisis, because when you can't talk about foreign policy, when you can't debate, when you can't criticize, you don't end up with good policy.
Josh Paul, why was this the last straw for you? I mean, for example, if you were in charge of weapons sales, presumably you were dealing with Saudi Arabia, notoriously authoritarian. U.S. agencies concluded, even in just one case, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, that the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, was responsible for this. You oversaw arms sales to them, presumably. Why Israel?
So let me just be clear. I was one of multiple people involved in the arms sales process. Arms sales themselves are a presidential authority that is delegated to the Secretary of State, and then through the Secretary of State to the Undersecretary, who is actually responsible for approving them for the most part. But you're right. And as I said in my resignation letter, in my time in the department, I dealt with many, morally challenging, controversial arms sales. I think what made the difference for me here is that for all of those previous instances, even under the Trump administration, mind you, there was always room for discussion and debate and the ability to mitigate some of the worst possible outcomes, to delay sales until crises had passed so that they weren't contributing immediately into a humanitarian crisis, to work with Congress and be confident that once the policy debate had ended in State Department, there would be a congressional piece to it too. And Congress genuinely has stood up in the past repeatedly on matters of human rights and arms sales. What was different here was that there was none of that. There was no debate, there was no space for debate, and there was also no congressional appetite or willingness to have debate.
There's going to be a major march in Washington tomorrow. 350 people are arrested in Philly. We're going to play some clips of a major protest in Boston that happened last night. How much does grassroots protests like this, the thousands of people are protesting around the country, the shutdown of Grand Central by Jewish groups just last Friday night, have on the State Department, on the White House?
So I don't think it has much impact on the State Department. And that's okay, because I think policy processes are meant to happen within a policy framework. Again, the problem is they're not happening. I think it does have an impact on the White House. I think we've seen a significant change in tone in the last few weeks, not because there is a sudden deep care, frankly, for Palestinian civilian casualties on their own merits, but because there is a sense that there is a political crisis here developing for the Biden administration, that many people are saying, we're just going to sit out the next election. We have lost faith in this White House, in this administration. So I think that does have an impact. And let me also say, I have found it incredibly moving moving as well to watch these protests. I was up on the Hill for meetings, this week and last week, and came across in one office a sit-in that was happening where there was a group of Jewish students singing peace songs and holding up signs that said "Save Gaza." I found that incredibly moving. And I think it also tells Congress and it tells this administration that they are not in line with much of American public opinion. I think it's a much needed message.
Josh Paul, veteran State Department official who worked on arms deals and resigned in October in protest of a push to increase arms sales to Israel amidst the attack on Gaza. Visit democracynow.org to see all of our coverage on Gaza and Israel. Democracy Now! Is produced with Renee Feltz, Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Messiah Rhodes, Nermeen Sheikh, Maria Taracena, Tammy Warnoff, Tarina Nadura, Sam Alkoff, Tamery Astudio, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, and Sanji Lopez. Our executive director is Julie Crosby. Special thanks to Becca Staley, John Randolph, Paul Powell, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, Hugh Grant, Dennis Moynihan, David Prude, Dennis McCormick, Matt Ely, and Emily Anderson. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.